So here we are in week 8, and we're going to focus on the influences of culture. And I want to talk to you about a concept of social entrepreneurship, and hopefully, I'll make the case for how these connect. I'm glad you enjoyed the last week's topics on adaptive approaches to leadership. And I guess this kind of continues that theme in a way because as your book starts out in indicating, because of globalization, there is an increasing need to understand cultural differences around the world. Your world is going to be a lot different than mine was, although I have had the opportunity to travel to places like Russia and Italy and Hawaii, and in trying to impart these theories of nonprofit management, and clearly one has to be aware of a shrinking world in which we must be cognizant of and sensitive to the various cultural factors that are driving people in other lands. I should also say, in doing those trainings, I also have encountered people from just about all the 7 continents, and so it's quite a challenge. Your world is probably going to be even more so in that regard. So there's a need to be competent. There's a need to have knowledge, and your book does a good job of identifying this. Culture is defined similarly to the way we talked about corporate cultures, values, norm, and standards, behaviors defined by folks. Important concepts to keep in mind. Ethnocentrism is looking at everybody else through the prism of your own ethnic experience. And of course, in social work, we get trained and learn how to hopefully not to bring such biases, even one of being prejudicial, kind of self-orienting and screening and filtering, once again through your own beliefs or data or information that may or may not be applicable to the individual or the situation at hand. Global leadership and organizational behavior is discussed in the chapter, and including some important dimensions that the writer highlights that we see across the world, issues involving avoidance, power, collectivism, assertiveness, performance, how the future is viewed, and how being humane is viewed. I've also done a lot of teaching to people coming from Asia, and it's always interesting, especially in the classes, how things are much different along the lines of the collectivism dimension that they speak of, where people tend to act more as a group, especially those that I've taught from mainland China. And they go into the cultural global clusters on page 436, which is interesting. Some of this can be interpreted as a little stereotypical, but nonetheless, these dynamics and dimensions do exist in cultures, and are something to be noted and be aware of. Of course, you're always going to see variation, but the purpose of this chapter, I think, is to sensitize us to these various dimensions. Some of the leadership behavior that they see across cultural clusters, no matter what the underlying dynamics are the charismatic, value-based, the leader that can inspire, motivate, is visionary, the team-oriented, team-building, common purpose, participative, delegating and implementing decision-making, humane oriented, being more supportive, considerate, compassionate, the autonomous leader, the independent and unique, and the protective, being more self-centered, status conscious, face savings. I think the point here is that there are some common leadership behaviors that you can identify no matter what the culture. I thought the universally desirable attributes as well as universally undesirable attributes on page 448 are really interesting. I don't think they're anything that you'd be surprised by, but certainly the way they link them across the globe is interesting, and I guess something that one would want to be aware of. There are strengths to looking at these cultural determinants. There's some quantitative research. There's more of it happening now as the world becomes smaller. But there is no single theory, terminology, perception, measures that can pull it all together. It's a pretty wide-ranging milieu that we're talking about, and one I think has to be immersed in it. And certainly if your interest is in international work, everyone I know that is in it, it's very rewarding, very interesting, and certainly you have to bring all that you have to the situation, because it comes down to understanding yourself, others, differences, looking at factors through a cultural perspective, and looking at the modern global community, which is changing in a nanosecond. So one of the types of leadership that I think is important in this changing globalization dynamic is being an entrepreneur. And I've given you some material both on Blackboard as well as here about how we perceive entrepreneurs and why it's needed more than ever as your workplace becomes more virtual. You're going to have a lot of autonomy, a lot of ability to do things on your own, but you're also going to have to be leader, entrepreneur, chief cook, bottle washer, working 24/7 probably to get the job done. So a lot of people think entrepreneurs have to have certain personality traits. It's not that. Entrepreneurship can be learned, and it gets learned by, first of all, changing your mindset about risk and disorganizing, and I like the term creative destruction, kind of like the child playing with the Lego set, building it up, tearing it down, and rebuilding something new and different. So entrepreneurs like to disrupt and see how they can do things differently and better. Peter Drucker wrote a book back in the late 80s, identified the 7 sources for innovation, the unexpected thing that happens, the incongruity in how things are working and how they really should be, innovation based on process need, and changes in industry structure or market structure, like the Affordable Care Act, and how entrepreneurs are responding to that, demographics, just population changes. Clearly in California, if you can't relate to a Latino population, you're gonna cut out more than half of your potential clients. Changes in perception, mood, and meaning, and new knowledge, both scientific and non-scientific. If you look at the innovation exercise I provided for you and think about it in terms of what you've seen after you read the definitions in a little more depth, I think it will be a little clearer how this works. I have a list that I've synthesized from Peter Drucker and Tom Peters, and I'll just summarize it in the interest of time. Have a passion, make sure you know where you're going, train for it, test, pilot new things, start with the customer, what the person you're serving values. Tom Peters, talks about creative swiping. That's stealing. If you see an idea that's good, make it your own. Tweak it, change it, make it happen. With the internet now, there's no more copywriting, there's no more being able to stamp something as yours. Once it's out there, it's gone, and somebody else is making it better. I'll put on my Mobile Fresh link for you so you can also see the video of a social enterprise that we're doing basically to combat poverty by bringing fresh fruits and vegetables to folks in areas that are literally food deserts. And then you may want to analyze yourself in terms of these characteristics. This comes from another course that I teach on social entrepreneurship. But what are your capacities in these areas? Being innovative, being opportunity oriented, resourceful, creating value. Change agent is something that I always thought defined a social worker, so I was somewhat surprised when entrepreneurs, at least social entrepreneurs, see that as a main outcome of their endeavors. This is a little concept that I've put together for my organization, and the heart of what we're talking about is in the middle: increased capacity to provide mission-related services as the result of generating income from programs, services, and products which build on agency competencies and responsiveness to client customer value. So you can see all the buzzwords from the previous slides that this effort takes into account. What does this have to do with the concept of culture that we discussed? It's interesting if you look at the Skoll Foundation, and Skoll, I think his first name is Peter, was one of the founders of eBay. He gives out $7 million in awards each year, 7 $1 million projects to social enterprises all over the world, and most of those go to developing countries and people in other cultures, because this is taking root in the effort to respond to needs. And in some ways, people in these developing countries have a greater ability to do that because they're not in little boxes and little cubby holes like we're put into, because of our development of our approach to solving such issues. This is ways in which I have described to my staff, trying to translate for them, because as social workers we don't get necessarily trained in marketing and business techniques. And so you could see where I take an issue like conferences, and in the social concept we might call it public relations, but in the entrepreneurial concept we call it branding. So we've taken over a couple of conferences which have put us in the lead on mental health issues and child care issues. And so for me it has both a business side as well as a social public relations side. Child development centers speak to the entrepreneurial concept of opportunity. On the social side, we might call it child development. And then you see some of the ventures we've tried, some of the ones we've done: property ownership, Cafe for a Cause, management service organization, vending machines. These all generate revenue to do more mission. We're exploring some other things, as you can see. This is by no means an exhaustive approach. The last thing I will ask you to look at is I put on the blackboard crisis innovation cycle. This is an interesting theory what a lot of futurists subscribe to, that what you have to do to innovate is fail, and the natural cycle for innovation is you create, you compete, you collaborate, you control, and then you crash. And when out of the crash comes the next innovation, and you'll see that that chart and that graph if you look at that. So take a look at the Mobile Fresh video. think about the impact of culture and the new world that's going to be possible for your endeavors in the future.